All right, let's dive in. Today's deep dive is a fascinating one. We're tackling the question of, did ancient aliens influence human evolution? You guys sent in this lecture by Bruce Fenton, and he's really been exploring this idea, and it raises some pretty wild questions. Fenton goes into all sorts of evidence in this lecture, from these unexplained events in Earth's history to some really strange anomalies in our own DNA. It's pretty mind-blowing.
Yeah, it definitely makes you think about things in a new way.
For sure. So Fenton starts off by highlighting how resistant the scientific community seems to be to the idea of extraterrestrial life. Almost like they're afraid of finding it. He uses the Viking lander experiments on Mars as one example.
Oh, right. Where some scientists seemed really hesitant to accept any evidence that pointed towards life.
Exactly. It's like they were almost hoping not to find anything. And Fenton even claims that scientists like Gilbert Levin, who was involved in those Viking experiments, and Milton Wainwright, who believes he's found evidence of life in Earth's atmosphere, have been kind of sidelined for their findings.
That is interesting. This resistance to new ideas in science, and it happens.
It makes you wonder.
It does. Think of the term paradigm shift,
Okay, yeah.
coined by Thomas Kuhn. He argued that scientific progress, it isn't always this neat and tidy process.
Right, there are going to be bumps along the way.
Exactly. And scientists are just like anyone else. They can be influenced by their own beliefs and biases.
Sure, we all have our own preconceived notions.
It's true. Just think back to Galileo.
Oh, yeah, good example.
He was persecuted for supporting the idea that the Earth revolved around the sun. It can be really hard for people to let go of old ideas. Sometimes new evidence just doesn't fit into the accepted way of thinking.
It's easier to just dismiss it than to rethink everything.
It can be.
So is this resistance to evidence of extraterrestrial life really just a desire for scientific rigor? Or is there something else going on, like a fear of the unknown?
It could be a bit of both. I mean, the unknown can be pretty scary.
It's true. Now, let's switch gears a bit. Let's talk about tektites. These are glassy materials that are found all over the Earth. But there's this one specific field, the Australasian tektites, that covers a massive area.
30% of Earth's surface.
30%. Fenton really dives into the mystery of where these tektites came from, and he proposes this really interesting idea that they might actually be debris from an ancient alien spacecraft.
The scale of that field, it's tough to explain with just the standard asteroid impact theory.
It's massive. The mainstream explanation is that they were formed by a large asteroid impact in Indochina. But Fenton points out that there's no impact crater large enough to account for how spread out these tektites are. Plus, the tektites themselves have some unique properties.
Yeah, the glass it's incredibly homogeneous.
Meaning
it's very uniform in its composition. It's really, really hard to get that level of homogeneity in a sudden impact event. It would be like trying to perfectly blend a smoothie in a split second.
Oh, okay, I get it.
You need time and the right condition.
You get that consistency.
Yeah,
And then there's this specific type of tektite called Mungnon layered tektite. What's that all about?
This type shows signs of molten material, kind of like pooling and mixing over time.
Huh, interesting.
Which suggests an aerial burst event, Imagine something explodes in the atmosphere rather than directly impacting the surface.
So kind of like an airburst.
Yeah, like an airburst. And Fenton connects this to the fact that there were multiple impact events around the same time, around 790,000 years ago, in different parts of the world. So he asked the question, were these truly random impacts? Or could they have been something more intentional?
It's definitely a question worth considering. And that leads us to a really, really intriguing case that Fenton presents.
The Boston Barrow case.
Yes. This involves an Aboriginal elder named Jerry Bostock and a psychic medium, Valerie Barrow. They both claim to have experienced a shared vision of a crashed alien spacecraft in Australia. Yeah, it's wild. According to Fenton, this vision revealed that a massive alien vessel was destroyed in Earth's orbit about 780,000 years ago. He suggests that the survivors, they couldn't colonize Earth directly, so they decided to do something else. Genetically modify the existing hominins, leading to us, modern humans.
I mean, it sounds crazy, but it's interesting how this story, it kind of aligns with other evidence.
It does. We've got the tektite event, those multiple impacts, even a magnetic field reversal, all happening around the same time as this alleged genetic intervention. And then we have this sudden appearance of these new hominin species with larger brains.
Like evolution suddenly kicked into overdrive.
It does. It was a huge jump from the previous trajectory. And Fenton doesn't stop there. He points to a near-extinction event in the human lineage, about 900,000 years ago. He suggests that this wasn't a global catastrophe, but a divergence point, or a small, isolated group of genetically modified hominins in Australia became the founders of a new lineage.
It's like a founder effect, but on a huge scale. This small group, they're carrying these unique modifications. They're isolated from other populations. And Australia, well, it would have presented unique evolutionary pressures.
Which could have sped things up even further.
Exactly.
Now, to really understand how those modifications might have happened, we need to look at the human genome itself. Fenton highlights some really interesting genetic anomalies, and he believes these could point to artificial modification.
One of the most striking is chromosome 2 fusion.
What is that?
So in all other great apes, they're two separate chromosomes. But in humans, they're fused together. This fusion event was highly unlikely. But somehow it became the dominant form in our species.
It's like someone combined two instruction manuals into one.
It is. And it also created this reproductive barrier between us and other great apes, like we were being set apart.
And then we've got these things called human accelerated regions, or HAs.
These are sections of DNA that are incredibly stable, across almost all mammals. But they show these rapid changes, specifically in humans. And many of these HARs play a role in brain development.
Like someone went in and tweaked the code to boost our brain power.
It's a possibility.
And then there are these things called human conserved deletions, or H-condyls, which are these large chunks of DNA, again, in highly conserved regions, that are just missing in humans.
And again, these missing pieces, they seem to be linked to our unique cognitive abilities. When you consider how unlikely all these changes are to happen just by chance, in such a short time frame, it really makes you think.
It does. Are we just a product of random mutations? Or is there more to the story? We'll be right back to dig deeper into those genetic anomalies and what Fenton thinks they might mean. So we're back and still trying to wrap our heads around those genetic anomalies that Fenton thinks might be evidence of ancient alien intervention. It's a lot to take in.
What's really wild is how Fenton connects these genetic anomalies to a specific place, Australia. He thinks the isolation of Australia played a huge role in the development of these uniquely human traits.
Right. He says that around 790,000 years ago, hominins shouldn't have even been able to reach Australia. Like the ocean currents, the climate, everything was working against them.
It's true. Even with basic boats, the currents would have been really difficult to navigate.
But they crossed what's called Wallace's Line, this invisible barrier that separates Southeast Asia from the islands that lead to Australia. How'd they do it?
Wallace's Line is like this major dividing line for species. The ones on either side, they're super different because for millions of years, crossing it was almost impossible.
It makes the fact that hominins made it to Australia at that time pretty remarkable.
Absolutely.
And once they reached those islands just north of Australia, it seems pretty logical that they would have eventually made it to Australia itself.
You're right. You're exploring these new lands. You've already crossed this incredible barrier. There's this massive continent just south of you, ripe for the taking. You got to keep going.
It makes you wonder, maybe they had help. Like, what if they were guided or even transported to this isolated location? And this goes back to that near extinction event we were talking about earlier, about 900,000 years ago, where the human population plummeted to like only 1,300 individuals.
Oh, wow. I didn't realize it was that small.
Yeah. Fenton's idea is that this wasn't some global catastrophe, but more of a splitting off point, like a moment where a small, isolated group of these genetically modified hominins in Australia, well, they became the founders of a new lineage.
Wow. Okay, that's a really interesting idea. Think about the impact of that, the founder effect. You have a small group, specific genetic modifications, isolated from other populations. They're facing these unique evolutionary pressures. And that could lead to the fast development of very distinctive traits.
And get this was during the same period that we see that chromosome 2 fusion event. This fusion, it's unique to humans, it created a reproductive barrier between us and other great apes. It's like we were set on a completely different path.
Like someone flipped a switch and bam, humans are on a whole new trajectory. But of course, with any big experiment, there are always going to be unexpected results.
Right, exactly. And Fenton doesn't sugarcoat things. He acknowledges that, yeah, our amazing cognitive abilities have come with a price tag. Humans are prone to all sorts of diseases and genetic disorders. Like, are these glitches in the system?
Could be. Maybe it's a consequence of a rapid and imperfect genetic intervention. You have to imagine these advanced beings, maybe they're working with limited technology and trying to improve this existing species. Who knows?
Yeah.
Maybe they weren't able to predict every single little thing that could go wrong.
That's a really thought-provoking concept. These beings, maybe they're driven by necessity or even compassion, who knows? They're trying to improve the hominin species, but maybe they didn't quite get it right. And here we are, thousands of years later, dealing with the results.
That's true. But also, think about it. We're now thinking about bioengineering astronauts.
For space travel.
Yes, exactly. Maybe to correct for the challenges of living in a non-Earth environment. It's like, are we about to do the same thing that was potentially done to us?
It is kind of poetic when you think about it that way. We're trying to overcome our own limitations by manipulating our biology, just like what may have happened to our ancestors. But are we ready for that kind of power? What are the ethical implications of all this?
It's a question we need to think about really carefully. I mean, after all, the choices we make now could affect our species forever.
That's heavy stuff. Fenton's research is just, it's so fascinating. He's laid out some pretty compelling evidence and ideas, and it's almost too much to absorb all at once. But when we come back, we're going to explore what all of this might actually mean for us and how we understand humanity's place in this vast universe. Stick around. We're back, and man, this deep dive into Bruce Fenton's research has really got me thinking about, like, the big picture. You know what I mean?
Yeah, it makes you question everything, doesn't it?
It totally does. What does it even mean for humanity if even just a little bit of what Fenton's saying is true?
It forces us to rethink, like, our whole place in the universe.
Yeah.
Right? We like to think we're at the top, the pinnacle of evolution. But what if we're actually, the result of some ancient genetic experiment?
Whoa, that is a humbling thought.
It is.
It's like we've been looking at our history through this tiny little peephole, focused on just what we can see, what we can touch. And we've completely missed this whole other massive cosmic picture that could be, like, right there.
Totally. It's like we're trying to solve a puzzle, but we're missing half the pieces. And Fenton's research, whether or not you agree with his conclusions, it really makes you consider that maybe there are pieces we just haven't found yet. And those pieces, they could change everything.
And what about the future? If we are the product of genetic engineering, does that mean we can engineer ourselves even further? Like, could we fix those genetic flaws Fenton was talking about? Or even enhance ourselves, make ourselves better?
Well, we're already seeing the beginning of that with stuff like CRISPR, We can edit genes now with this crazy precision. Imagine the possibilities, but also the risks, right? We're messing with the very foundation of life.
It's kind of exhilarating, but also scary. It's like we're on the verge of something totally new. We could change our species forever. But also, there could be unintended consequences. We don't know.
Absolutely. And that's a huge responsibility. If we really do have this power to change our own evolution, we got to be so careful. We have to think about the ethics, the long-term effects of what we're doing. We don't want to repeat the same mistakes, if mistakes were made before.
It's a trip to think about, What would those ancient beings, the ones who might have changed us all those years ago, what would they think about us now?
It's a great question. Maybe they'd be proud of how far we've come, our resilience, our creativity, the way we solve problems. But maybe they'd also be worried about our, tendency towards conflict and destruction. It's a fascinating thought experiment.
Fenton's research, it doesn't give us all the answers, and that's okay. It's more about getting us to ask the hard questions, to be open to things we haven't considered before, and just to keep searching for the truth.
Right. We're still figuring out our own story. And there's so much we just don't know yet.
That's what makes it so exciting. It's like this ongoing discovery process. We're constantly learning new things, changing our perspective on the universe and our place in it.
Exactly. It's an adventure.
So as we wrap up this deep dive into Fenton's work, I hope we've, sparked something in you, given you something to think about. Whether you're totally on board with Fenton's ideas or you're still skeptical, it's important to keep asking questions, keep exploring, and keep an open mind. After all, who knows what amazing things we might discover?
I love that. Keeping an open mind is key.
Thanks for joining us on this journey. We'd love to hear what you're thinking. Hit us up on social media. Let's keep this conversation going. Until next time, keep looking up, keep questioning, and keep wondering.
I would have been on top of the charts, but it's politics. You do some gimmick shit and post, you get a lot of clicks. Drop some real shit and they probably won't acknowledge it.